Sometimes it only takes one person to make the difference between life and death. In the darkest depths of a cave, far from civilization, a father must decide, survive or perish, a decision that will cost him everything. His sons' lives hang by a thread. The cold, the hunger, the crushing weight of isolation. But the worst? The terror of not knowing if you'll see the light of day again. This is not just a fight for survival. It's a battle of life or death, where one wrong move could destroy everything. A father trapped in the abyss, his body breaking down, his son's cries echoing through the silence. Can they make it out alive? Or will they be lost forever, swallowed by the very cave that promised adventure? No one knows the horrors that await, and the worst part, the rescue may come. But will it be too late? Get ready for the most heart-stopping, bone-chilling survival tale you've ever heard. This is no ordinary caving expedition. This is survival. And this is the terrifying truth of the fight to live. But, like any addiction, this hunger for risk can have its consequences. The story I'm about to tell you is one of those consequences. A tale that serves as a grim reminder of how quickly things can spiral out of control when you push too far, too hard, and too fast. This is the story of a man named Gary Lutz. A man who, for most of his life, had chased danger without hesitation, without fear. His love of exploration, of adventure, had taken him deep into the caves of West Virginia, where he had spent years guiding and teaching others about the subterranean world. To Gary, caves were not just an environment, they were a way of life. He knew them like the back of his hand. They were his playground, his escape, his challenge. And on June 18th, 1990, Gary, ever the fearless adventurer, took his two sons, Gary Jr. and Timothy, on what was supposed to be a simple, enjoyable trip through a familiar cave system. This wasn't the first time they'd ventured into the dark, winding tunnels beneath the Earth's surface. They had done it before, and Gary had always prided himself on his ability to keep them safe, to navigate the treacherous passages without fail. But that day, something was different. That day, the cave, which had always felt like a second home to Gary, turned on them in a way they could never have anticipated. It was supposed to be an easy trip. They were familiar with the terrain. Gary was confident. He had done this 100 times before. But then, the first sign of trouble emerged when Gary Jr.'s light flickered and went out. A small inconvenience, he thought at first. Nothing to worry about. But when Timothy's light went out shortly after, a sense of unease started to creep in. They tried to stay calm, tried to find a solution, but the cave had a way of swallowing them whole. It wasn't long before they realized they were lost. The darkness around them became more oppressive, more suffocating. Gary, the experienced caver, who had always prided himself on his skill, now found himself in the position of having no idea which way to go. They had no backup lights, no way of knowing which direction to take. The situation was quickly spiraling beyond their control. The silence of the cave was deafening. It felt as if the walls themselves were closing in on them, as if the earth was conspiring against them. Gary's mind raced. He had been in tight situations before, but this was different. There was no way out, no clear path, just endless passages stretching out in every direction, each one as indistinguishable as the next. They stumbled through the darkness, hoping for something, anything, that would show them the way. But there was nothing. No sign of light, no indication of an exit. The cave had swallowed them whole. The hours turned into days, and the cold began to gnaw at their bones. The air was damp, heavy with moisture, making every breath feel like a struggle. Their water supply ran out quickly, and the food they had brought along was gone within the first few hours. Gary tried to remain strong, to be the rock his sons needed. But as time passed, the weight of their situation began to crush him. He could see the fear in their eyes, the desperation creeping in, and no matter how hard he tried to reassure them, he couldn't shake the growing sense of dread that clung to him like a shadow. They were lost, and the longer they remained in that suffocating blackness, the more the possibility of rescue seemed to fade into the distance. Timothy and Gary Jr. were starting to slip. They had always been strong, but the fear, the fatigue, and the hopelessness were beginning to take their toll. Timothy especially was hallucinating, seeing flickers of light that weren't there, hearing whispers in the dark that didn't exist. It was the slow unraveling of their minds, the kind of breakdown that can only happen when you've been trapped in the dark for far too long. Gary watched them both, helpless, knowing that he had no answers, no way to fix what was broken. And still, he tried to reassure them, to keep them going, to keep their spirits up, even as his own hope seemed to be slipping away. The cave had a way of turning everything against them. The more they tried to fight it, the more it seemed to push back, to swallow them deeper into its depths. The emotional toll was far greater than the physical. They were trapped, alone, and no one knew where they were. As the days dragged on, Gary began to question everything. What had they done wrong? What if they never made it out? What if they perished here, in this cold, damp tomb, never to be seen again? The weight of those thoughts began to suffocate him. The fear, the real fear, the kind that gnaws at your soul, had taken hold of him. And it was then, just when they had almost given up hope, when the darkness seemed like it would swallow them whole, that something miraculous happened. A faint cry, barely a whisper, echoed through the cave. It was so soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Someone had heard them. Someone was coming. The sound of rescuers, guided by that desperate call, slowly made their way through the maze of tunnels. But the journey was far from over. The cave was still treacherous, the tunnels narrow and winding. It was a race against time, a fight to survive, a desperate battle to escape the dark, unyielding abyss. When the rescuers finally reached them, they found Gary, weak and trembling, but still alive. His sons were barely conscious, clinging to the last thread of hope. It was nothing short of a miracle. But even then, the battle wasn't over. The rescue was just as dangerous as being trapped in the cave itself. The narrow passages, the unstable footing. It was a constant fight for survival. When they were finally pulled to safety, it felt like a dream. But the emotional scars, the trauma of the experience, would linger forever. What had begun as an adventure, a thrill-seeking challenge, had turned into a nightmare, one that left them scarred for life. The cave had offered them a brutal lesson, a reminder that no matter how fearless you think you are, no matter how confident you are in your abilities, the darkness always has the final word.